Two Wood for a Wheat is a board game podcast. We review and criticize board games, diving deep into the strategies and mechanisms that make them great or make them forgettable.
Welcome to Two Wood for a Wheat. My name's Tony Faber.
My name is Pat Flannery.
How you doing, Pat?
I'm good. Today we are reviewing AEG's new game, Shake That City, a wonderful game about shaking a box, displaying out 9 cubes, and throwing them onto a city and making a fully functional city of big points and fun times.
And then later on, we discuss different forms of input randomness. Woohoo! So, Shake That City. We're here to review board game. My head is admittedly elsewhere. You know, 2 days ago, we had a tree come down in our backyard.
Is it because you shook the tree? Were you
60-foot
so
pine
into
tree.
shaking that you couldn't help it? You just shook the tree right over?
We had a rather vicious storm. Anyway, it was an interesting 2 days of the dog sniffing the falling tree.
Fascinating.
Anything exciting happening in Chicago?
We have the worst air quality in the world right now. Thank you, Canada. I've made sure to
It's
thank
actually
my
worse around
Canadian
Cleveland,
wife a
but,
few times.
you know,
well,
it's-
as of this morning, it was 230 in some parts of suburban Chicago. So
Cleveland's
really
over
bad.
240 now, and it's actually over about 180 between Philadelphia and Chicago. It's
Well, that's nice. Okay, so instead of smoking half a pack of cigarettes by virtue of going outside, they're smoking half a pack plus 1 cigarettes. That's
you're
nice,
actually
Tony.
probably only smoking a couple cigarettes a day.
As I understand it, it's about 20 AQI equals 1 cigarette. So I think that there's 20 inside of a pack of cigarettes, so 200 AQI.
Look at it this way: at the peak of it, then for 3 days we were smoking 2 packs a
half
day.
a pack. Yes, I understand
we
you
were-
had
we were about
800. No, thank you. So
Yeah.
yuck.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
suffice to say, I've got
Today's
my masks
podcast
on.
is about climate change.
It is. As
And-
my dad says, the planet feels sick.
We will be looking at environmental regulations that the EPA, rulemaking that the EPA is doing.
And
We're gonna
designing
be
board
looking
games
at the
based off of disasters. Can
effects
we
of the-
sell our Floridian real estate fast enough to fool people before it gets sunk underwater? Will the HOA be willing to pay out $10,000 per square foot in order to build out a dam against the encroaching seawater? Can we sell our water rights fast enough in Arizona to ensure that we have got buyers for our houses that aren't going to be able to have water? Will the HOA be willing to ship in water via trucks? TBD, it's a fun game of trying to sell stocks before the planet destroys any wealth and value from it.
And meanwhile, how many hundreds of thousands of trolls on social media are being paid to, bot accounts being paid to deny the existence of climate change? It's an interesting
Too
question.
many. I think there's a fun game out there about insurance and how long a place is willing to insure something. There's a lot of good climate change themed games that are just waiting for somebody, maybe me, maybe someday, to
Insurance
design
basically
them.
gives you a window into the end of the world in sort of a stealthy business manner.
Yes.
So, Pat, Shake That City.
And our topic of conversation, which as I understand it, is design elements that portray input randomness in different fashions.
Yes, different forms of input randomness.
But
Just
specifically
repeat that
the
a lot if
design
you're
version
suffering
of it?
from insomnia.
Right.
This will be an interesting subject. I kid you not. Anyway, I'm going to be
excited about
discussing
math.
Shake That City from AEG, designed by Mads Fløe. He's from Denmark. That's the best you're going to get out of me from the pronunciation. Co-designed
I
with
could probably
Kare
pronounce it.
Torndal Kjær. Again, butchering Danish pronunciation. I think they've done some smaller games. This is their first major release, I'm going to say.
I took 6 months of Danish, so Mads Fleur and
Mads Fleur,
Kåre
okay.
Torndal Kjær is how I would
There you
pronounce
go.
that.
Use that one. Anyway, this is a...
Hold on. Are we skipping games that we played recently?
Okay. I just thought we'd, save 10 minutes in the podcast and
Is it because you haven't
skip
played any
skip
games
my
recently,
early
Tony?
nap. Yes. What have you been playing, Pat?
That's an affirmative. I played some more Frosthaven. I believe that I'm in the final 4 missions, Tony, and it feels good to be approaching the end. At this point, I'm just truncating the admin. I'm putting in, check this out in 3 weeks. No, I'm going to check it out this week. Thank you. I got to get it done, but I'm still enjoying one of my new characters. The other new character I'm just not that big of a fan of. I think that it might be more powerful as I unlock certain elements in higher levels that allowed me to toggle its secret power, but I really want to just bust out this other secret character who I just unlocked. So TBD. Next time you hear from me, I might be
I'm betting
all
it's
over
the
that.
Transformers character that you're enjoying.
I do love the Transformers character. You would be right. Yep. Do I love the, spoiler warning, 3, 2, 1, do I love the Steam-based character that only has a few mechanisms by which it toggles the Steam level? Not that much, but I suspect that at higher levels it will be much more toggleable and be able to do its more superb moves more consistently. So we'll see. Then War of the Ring, the card game, got another play-in 1v1 versus Tina. It successfully works as a 1-hour game. You can play a version where you are just playing through the Fellowship of the Ring, and it's 5 rounds instead of 9 as it is in the big box game, and you have more concise decks. You basically merge 2 decks together for the Free People and merge 2 decks together for the Shadow Forces. And man, Tina asked me to be the bad guys again. That was a mistake. I had 3 Nazgul in reserve for most of it, and each Nazgul that's in reserve nets you a special power, so I was netting double bonus draws. I was forcing her to forsake cards, and I intermittently pulled these Nazgul out of my reserve, and I used them to sway story paths and battlefields my way at key moments. And the story scaling for Free Peoples, normally in the big box, in the big version of the game, the story beats you have to actively defeat and overcome have a higher attack than the defense of the Free Peoples as the Shadow Forces. In this smaller 1v1 game, it's just if it's a tie, nobody wins. And I think that's a mistake because the Free People still have the 3 card draw, which means they have an inherent disadvantage that has to be supplemented by the decks and the tying in between characters. So you, as the Shadow Forces characters, seem to be able to just brute force the heck out of the other player again and again and again by playing at least 2 cards per round. Since you have to play one in order to play it, you have to cycle another one. The Free Peoples have 3 cards, so they have to find ways to get a second card in order to cycle it so that they can play a second card. So I think the Free Peoples, they just have a tougher time of it, and they have to be more clever, and that's tough. So I'm excited to get more plays of this, but it is not looking good for the Free Peoples of Middle-earth.
I think perhaps what you should do is play the Free Peoples next time and play a newer Dark Power player, and that may give you a better sense of balance.
I suggested it, but Tina wanted to be the good guys. What can I say?
I'm sure you'll find a Dark Power player out there willing to take you up on the offer.
Somewhere.
Whose heart is corrupt and dark.
Somewhere. More corrupt and dark than mine, unlikely. Well, that's what I got right now, Tony. Did you have anything, or should we launch right back into Shakey
Well, besides some online nonsense, I did play a bunch of Just One at our birthday party, my birthday party, I should say, about 10 days ago. It went on and on. People sort of begrudgingly said they would play, and then people didn't want to leave, because that's how Just One goes.
That is the best plays of those games.
And then we played Just One again when I visited, had sort of a family visit with mother and aunt and uncle that I hadn't seen in a long, cousin that I hadn't seen in a long time. And similar, people weren't excited at the start. They were by the end.
I don't know if I told you, but I once had a 3-hour game of Concept, which is a similar game to Just One about throwing out words and trying to guess based off of a pre-designated grid of iconography and some demarcation markers, what somebody is trying to say. Yeah, I played a 3-hour game of that because the people, I didn't realize this, but they were all coked up. And they just loved the game. They were saying so many words per minute, and they had the best ideas. It was the craziest game of Concept that I've ever played, and it was absolutely nonstop. And somebody kept defending royalty throughout the entirety of it, and just loved the queen. That just raised the tensions and stakes even higher.
Yeah, Concept. Just One has a bit of a more simplistic feel while still making you think outside the box. And you just reminded me of like a 7-hour game of Just One that I was a part of.
It can happen.
It was weird. It was the most effective group I've ever seen, even though they were non-gamers and they were inebriated. And they were just cheering and yelling and loving Just One. So
it's about the group think more than anything else, that game, Just One.
It is. And they were on the same hops and barley influenced wavelength.
Wow. Well, Tony, we have just one game that we're reviewing tonight, and that is Shake That City. Shall we get into it?
Yes, Shake That City from AEG and designers that Pat will insert here as I failed to pronounce their names correctly. First-time designers, first-time large game designers, although they've done some smaller things. In Shake That City, Pat, we are building out our city of roads, parks, factories, residences, and stores, using those familiar city building elements in a unique way. The cube, what am I going to call it?
A cube
Box
plunger.
shaker? What?
Cube shaker. Yeah, that seems
cube
more
shaker.
eponymous than any other term we could use.
So first of all, you've got a grid of 6x6 squares that you're going to make your city of the 5 different city elements, each of which score differently. Like roads need to be connected to the edge of the board to score. Factories like to be next to roads and each other. Houses like to be on the beach, but they don't really like to be next to factories, and they don't like to be next to each other much. Stores like to be connected by roads, preferably from a long distance. Not quite sure why
In the
long
center of the
distance is.
city, it's with the highest real estate value.
Well, I played on the advanced board where it was a long distance towards the shore, and then your parks like to be next to the shore. They like to be next to houses, and they like to be next to factories for some reason.
On the back of the game, it does, yeah. There's 2 different sides of the board. One has slightly more complicated rules, but it's all effectively the same.
Spoiler, I jumped right into the slightly more complicated rules, and they are still quite light, and there's no reason why anyone listening to this podcast couldn't jump right into the advanced rules. So you are placing tiles down to score them, and then also to get bonuses for completing various rows of tiles all the way across the board, or columns going down, either by filling them entirely or getting 4 of a particular city building or city area. This is all feels like standard stuff. So the big twist is how you get those inputs, how you get to choose which tiles you put down. And you are not choosing tiles from a bag or from a row or from anything like that. You are doing it through this shaker. And the shaker, you have cubes of all the 5 terrain types in there, and then you shake them. I'm not going to explain the construction of this device. Suffice it to say, a mechanical idiot like me can put the thing together, and there's holes in the bottom, and when you shake and then push this sort of lever, a perfect 3x3 grid of cubes comes out. So you have a 3x3 grid of cubes of the random assortment of colors. And the person whose turn it is chooses which of those color assortments they're going to do, and they can't rotate or turn it. So let's say there's a green park in the upper left and the lower right, then you have to exactly simulate putting green parks 2 diagonally away from each other from upper left to lower right, if that's what you choose. And then all the other players do the same thing, except they can't choose the one that the player whose turn it was and who got to choose first, what they chose. If you're playing solo, you can't choose the one that has the most number of cubes come out in it. So it has this tremendous variety of what comes out. It may be exactly what you're looking for. It may be nothing what you're looking for. It may force you to go in different strategic directions than you had originally intended. And the inputs can vary widely. And you basically get 15 turns, 15 shakes of the shaker to give a random assortment of cubes. And you put out some variety of them in the exact positions as they come out of one and only one color, one terrain type. And then you score it up at the end based on how you've managed to put together your various terrain types and filled those rows and columns. Anything crucial that I'm missing?
Literally, Shake That City is a gimmicky game. It has a lot riding on that shake box. Other than that, it's just kind of a game about tiles do certain things and score in different ways, and it's all about the allotment of tiles and how they come out. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I was hoping for more than that. It's much more of a popcorn filler than I expected it to be, Shake That City. I was hoping for a bit more strategy to it, and I think that ultimately comes down to the way that the shake box distributes the cubes that ultimately become the tiles.
In that they're very random, you mean?
Yeah, so the cube color distribution, it has this huge impact on what comes up on your turn. So you might get this jackpot round where, in my experience, 4 grays turn up. That's awesome. I'm going to grab those grays. I'm going to put them out. Or you may have the crummy round when there's seemingly 1 or 2 of everything. And you can feel the distribution of the cubes, right? Each cube color has a certain number of distribution, red being the most, gray being the fewest. And over the course of the game, yes, you will feel that gray has the least cubes that tend to come out while red have the most. But on any given turn, you might see a ton of them at once. And then on any other given turn, you might see no gray for several turns in a row. And so the cube draw, it feels balanced as a whole, but it might whack you randomly turn by turn. And in a multiplayer game, if you were not first player, you might get that jackpot draw, or you might get that whack-a-mole draw where you just get whacked. and it's all about the turn order of whether it's your turn or not. It's missing for me refreshing moments of agency that you might find in a game like Tiny Towns, where you decide on what color cube comes out every third round or so. Instead, you get these random colors and a random number of each color and a random arrangement of each color and a random turn order saying whether you can take advantage of a good set of colors or not. And this cube distribution, it may shake out across an entire game, but it is unknowable in a single round. For me, that led to not being able to strategize much and a very tactical game that ultimately did not feel very satisfying and did not leave me feeling very clever at all.
I think I like the game more than you do. I enjoyed it. I like spatial puzzles, but I don't see this because of the randomness of the pulls. I see this as a push your luck game, basically. You can set up grand plans to make big scores by picking a big row of factories or a big row of shops, and then you're going to connect the road that runs by all those factories and all those shops and scores you millions of points if those roads show up. Right? That's the pushing your luck. Or you can have this set up with these houses spread out, and then you're going to put parks between them if they show up in that configuration. And I do like how early on you might grab a huge bunch of things so you can start filling your board out near the end. But near the end of the game, you're looking for that just one or two perfect things. And when 3 comes out, it drives you crazy because you can't fit them in on your board. You just need 1 green, not 3 greens, right? And in such a light game, the randomness of what comes out doesn't bother me too much because you can just play again. You know, I'm more tolerant of the randomness here. You know, and those push your luck decisions. It's like, ooh, that didn't work out. Let's do it again. Or wow, that came out absolutely perfectly.
Well, so I agree that it's a push your luck game. The thing for me is I wanted a distinct, like, discernible element that was push your luck. Like, hey, I'm going to drive this strategy within the game as far as possible. But for me, the entire game felt like it was pushing my luck, right? In a game like this, I wanted to play on a strategy, right? I wanted to fill gray areas on the board with high-scoring blue commercial zones and then connect them all the way to the edge of the map with a road. But the input randomness was so high and so unforgiving that I might not be able to enact that plan. And that's not me being like, well, that's, I pushed my luck and then I didn't shift my tactics. And so I didn't, roll with the punches. It might be like, no, literally there were no grays that came out that allowed me to even enact a semblance of this plan. I'm not saying that a tiling game needs a predictable strategic element, but I do think it should have an element that allows me to tactically carve out an effort round by round, like a coherent push your luck element where you may or may not be able to fill a particularly risky goal strategy depending on how your luck shakes out. But in Shake That City, the whole game is this push your luck test. It's totally unclear what cubes will come out at all, what arrangement they'll come out, whether it'll come out beneficially on your turn or not. Like, forget planning a risky set of turns. The entire game is on shaky ground.
Fair enough, but I do feel like there is some strategy in putting yourself in a position where multiple pulls, where you're not dependent on one thing, like I just need roads. No, you've got plans for whatever shows. You can make do. You want to be able to be flexible, bend in the wind. If this shows up, you're going to do this. If a good row of green shows up, you're going to do this. If this, you know what I mean? And there's a fair number of turns in the game where you can say it's random, and it is, but there's a fair number of turns that when what shows up, it's not obvious to me what you should play. I like a simple game that has not obvious decisions. Sometimes the perfect thing shows up, or nothing good at all shows up, and it's not a thinky decision. But often there's like, this is an okay move, and this is an okay one. Do I want to place these 3 maybe not quite optimal tiles, or 1 perfect tile? Those are the kinds of decisions I find interesting in this game.
When that took place, I found myself just filling as much of my board as possible. These edge of board scoring tiles, there's a huge emphasis on them. They can amount to, I believe it's 18 points, which might be a third of your score. It's huge. So a lot of the good strategy that I did in this game emphasized filling up as much of my board as possible with this secondary focus on actually synergizing my tiles. So rather than carefully primarily playing out a grid of blues surrounded by gray area or a black area over here away from my red area with a green area in between, it was more like I just, whenever I had those okay decisions, just choose the most, because that meant that I was going to probably score one of those outside tiles and get more points. And yeah, it's tactically fun to fill up my grid, but I wish that there was more emphasis on the clever city design than it was on I just need to fill stuff up. And for me, that resulted in me not knowing that when I won, I wasn't sure if I won because I had a lucky set of circumstances or I had a discernible set of strategic choices and clever tactical play that I made. I'm not sure what it was, and I suspect that maybe it was just because I got lucky and had more cubes that came out for me.
Interesting. You say that you just resorted to filling up the most cubes when it was your default in a decision, just playing the most tiles as you could. I found it interesting because I tried that strategy, and then I tried the strategy of really picking and choosing and trying to perfectly lay out my terrain. And the weird thing was I scored about the same either way. And in fact, something that was kind of dissatisfying, and this is where I kind of agree with you that the game left me was kind of sugar, but not sort of the deeply satisfying food, was that I found I was scoring almost exactly the same no matter what strategy
About
I tried.
52 points. Am I right?
It's funny you say that, Pat. I played this game 8 or 9 times, right? I scored 53 points in 5 of those games.
Yeah. See, we didn't talk before this. I just threw that out because I had the same experience.
Yes.
You know what it is, Tony? I think the game is too generous with its rounds. There are a very generous 15 rounds of play, and you may end up doing something close to what you set out to do just because there is so much time to do it. Like, I don't find that an elegant solution to the issue that I cited regarding the randomness. There are games that I won because one gray cube came up in the final round, and I was able to connect to a road complex at the edge of the board. It wasn't this grand moment. It was just kind of there. And I have had games.
But isn't it that same way in Calico when you're looking for the one tile and it either shows up or it doesn't?
No, because that whole time there wasn't a counter tension of what I should be playing versus what I actually did play. There was simply this is what I'm playing because it is there. And okay, yeah, the final cube came out and okay, great. I was hoping that it came out and it came out. And, the 5 rounds beforehand, it didn't come out, so I wasn't able to do it. And in Calico, it's because of poor planning. In this game, it feels like the randomness of the cube distribution and bad timing, so I was unable to get the gray cubes when they were available.
I actually kind of agree with you there. I was playing a little bit of devil's advocate. But again, Calico is a harder on the brain game and a longer game, so more forgiving of this game in that regard. I do think if you shortened the game from 15 rounds, then you would have more of the issue you're talking about, where it was just important to take stuff to fill rows.
I agree, which is why I'm saying it's not an elegant solution to just lengthen the game, because I don't think it fundamentally helps with that essential issue that I'm citing.
I enjoyed this game more than you do and found some addictiveness in wanting to play it again after it and play it again. But here's my issue with the game, which is a bit different than what you're talking about. The only variability from play to play in this game is that shaker and what cubes come out. And believe me, that's a lot of variability in forces. What?
And the edges of the board, how they're laid out. But it's
not
there's
much. There's two different maps you can play with where the edges of the board are different, so the scoring is slightly different.
And what color order, whether it's blue, black, gray, red, or whether it's red, black, green, blue, that. It's not much, though. It's front or back of the map. It's how the cubes come out, and then it's the edge of the quarter scoring. It's not much.
So in a game like Tiny Towns, and it's really easy and I think appropriate to compare this to Tiny Towns because in that game you're filling a 4x4 grid and you're building buildings and it's placed somewhat similarly, and it has that agency of certain resources and trying to fit things in a cramped space, and it's by the same company. So, but in that game, they have this variability of, okay, there's 10 different sets of buildings you can play with, and you can mix and match, and it makes it feel completely different. And also the game, if you're playing in the game where other people are choosing the resources, then there's the variability of, okay, I know Pat likes to go for a red building strategy, so he's going to pull a lot of red cubes, so I have to be able to deal with a lot of red cubes in my space, so your choices are impacting my little play area.
Right.
This is bingo style, so there's no interaction, which has it move fast and has the advantages of bingo games, but because it's a bingo game, it doesn't have inherent variety from play to play, and I just think it's a game that I don't know about the legs of the game.
Yeah.
Because I just don't feel like it plays very differently from one play to another.
Yeah, separate from Tiny Towns, it was sorely lacking that feeling of agency that you get, and that breeds interaction in that game. And then similar to Tiny Towns and Planet Unknown, which, Planet Unknown had issues with randomness, but it had this variability to it, where you had a different map and a different company each time, and Oh my gosh, so many random elements so that even if you didn't have a particularly clever play, you were still getting the dopamine rush of freshness and, a new way that things fit together that is sorely lacking in this game. It's just ultimately not that replayable, unfortunately.
I think you can pull it out from time to time or have a little, 2-day frenzy of playing it several times solo and like that. And again, I think it's a fun game. It's not a deep game. It's a fairly light and random game, and doesn't have a lot of variability. I do like the idea of dealing with random inputs and having to react to them, and I don't think it's done badly. That doesn't bother me as much as it does you, but I think this is kind of a fun little trifle of a game.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing about it for me is that it's short and replayable, and I can play a few games quickly. I don't think it's a bad game, but it's not exceptional, and I don't find it particularly fun because it's sorely lacking clever moments that I thrive in. And I think it has a place, but that place is at the end of a game night after everyone has already spent their brain power on a more clever game that they played.
And just getting into the visceral shaking of the thing, which, by the way, doesn't work exactly perfectly. Sometimes you shake it and not all 9 cubes come out. So that's a little bit a small imperfection. I mean, you can reshake it and it usually works, but it doesn't quite work perfectly. I think it would also work for if you wanted a Tiny Towns type game, but you wanted to play it with a casual party with non-gamers.
Yeah, I think it might work for non-gamers and
was
kids.
not as vicious
Yeah.
as Tiny Towns or as cerebral as Tiny Towns. This would work.
I can see it, and that gimmick of that shake box might draw them in, but as it stands, Shake That City is on
gimmick.
shaky ground.
Shaky ground. How long did you have to think for shaky ground?
About 3 milliseconds.
Anyway, so that's the enjoyable, but I'm going to say slight game, Shake That City.
And now the beautifully, elegantly titled Design Elements That Engender Input Randomness section of our episode.
Yes, just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it, Pat?
I feel like I'm reading an engineering book.
In case you're wondering what this topic is really about, it's games want to be able to throw variability at you and often want to be able to have random things appear or have random ways that your options are offered to you. And this topic got generated because in thinking about Shake Your City, it really is a novel thing to shake out cubes and come up with a 3x3 grid of cubes that you choose from and place in that particular order. That was an innovative thing and an innovative way of coming up with your options. I think if the game had simply said, choose a tile from these 5 tiles in a row, it would be a far more bland and forgettable game than it is.
I don't think it would have been published.
I don't think it would have been. It would have just been like, this is like somebody did this as a prototype exercise in game design school, but it wasn't actually much fun.
Yeah. Now, input randomness, this is the randomness that occurs before you make your decision. So Shake That City has only 32 cubes. 9 of them will come out each round, and you'll get about a quarter of them each round, but you may get repeats from the round previous. And you don't know what orientation they'll be in. And you don't know if you'll be able to choose a color that's best for you. So, it has this element of input randomness. And to some extent, the input randomness affects each other from round to round. If this round has 4 grays and there's only 6 grays in the entire game, well, probably next round there will not be that many grays. So maybe get those grays now. So there's some interconnectedness to it.
Wait a second, Pat. I just have to roll back about Shake Your City. The way I read the rules is you put all the cubes back in and shake them between turns.
Yeah.
So why would you say after 4 grays it would be less likely to show up?
Because in the meantime, as you pick up that box, and you put the grays in, but the other cubes might be closer to the holes.
Well, this is where it gets a little weird, and this is why this is such an odd form of input randomness, this shaker. Because if it's a game that doesn't hold up to being taken too seriously, and we're coming back to Shake That City here, because let's say 4 grays showed up in one round, and you took it, Pat, and I couldn't play any grays, and I desperately need roads, those grays, right? Well, then when it's my turn next, after you've shaken the thing, I'm going to really shake it around to shake out the cubes that were lying in those 9 spots and give the grays a chance. Whereas if I really wanted greens, I might just kind of put them in and not hardly shake it at all before I opened up the thing.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of...
We shook differently. So I put them in, and then I would shake. but more likely than not, the cubes at the edge were pushing the pre-existing cubes into the holes. So I had more of a rotation of cubes than you might have had.
Right. And I think you could have some variability depending on, players actually, I wouldn't call it cheating, but shaking differently to their own advantage.
That's so stupid.
In case this seems completely out of place in a modern board game, cube towers have been a thing for a long time,
Right.
It's
true.
And cube towers are these weird mechanical devices to give you inputs, and they might give you what resources or actions are available in a given turn. I think of Amerigo, that Stefan Feld game that uses a cube tower, and what cubes come out, or what actions you can take. And the more cubes there are, the stronger the action is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes cubes would get stuck in the tower for a while and, on a little ledge or something. So that red action wouldn't be taken much in this game.
Right.
So those things are obviously unique to the physical element of board games, and again, prevent one from taking the game too seriously and add sort of weird elements of randomness to them.
We call them
which
gimmicks.
is maybe not the intention of the designer.
But then you have more characteristically random generative elements like big decks of cards, right? Huge decks of cards create a lot of input randomness. But,
yes,
race for the galaxy. I have to put my plug in here. I know that I'll get one of 109 cards in base Race for the Galaxy. That's actually fairly predictable, especially if I play a lot of games of it. So I learned to expect the possibility of a card or a set of cards that do a similar thing.
Yeah, and one way you can tell how people feel about input randomness, this is my test for people who like card drafting games. Do you like It's a Wonderful World better, or do you like Seven Wonders better? Because Seven Wonders has all the cards come out. And in fact, they're divided into ages, first, second, and third age. So these cards are coming out in the first age, these cards are coming out in the second age, these cards are coming out in the third age. They don't come out in any particular order in It's a Wonderful World, and a lot of the cards never come out. And you can see the trade-offs there. There's a trade-off between more variability and more dealing with different things you've never seen before in It's a Wonderful World, but it's not as fair. Seven Wonders is a fairer game, right? So
I like Seven Wonders better. I also like Race for the Galaxy with only one expansion rather than the entire expansion arc, because the entire expansion arc effectively doubles the amount of cards, which means it's much more random.
I like It's a Wonderful World better, but I don't like the randomness in longer games. Now, we've spoken about this before, and I've spoken about having more tolerance for randomness in the shorter game. But input randomness is not just about how much randomness there is at the start. It's also about how that randomness shows up, and it's not just in a cube tower. Sometimes the way the randomness is delivered in the game, you can calculate the odds and make decisions based on the odds very easily. Like, if you're playing poker, there's 52 cards in the deck, and you've got, an ace in your hand, and there's 3 other aces out there, and you can calculate the odds that one's going to show up on the flop for you. It's very straightforward and calculable. Whereas something like Shake Your City, it's not just that it's this weird mechanism, but it's very hard to say, what are the odds that 2 grays in a row show up? That's almost impossible to do that math. Even if you know how many grays there are, how many things. I mean, a mathematician could work it out, but nobody in this little filler game is going to do that math or even have a good intuitive sense of it. It's hard to get an intuitive sense of it. So some games, it seems, want to sort of show their math more and make them more calculable, and some games don't want you to have much intuitive sense at all of the math behind them.
I think that you're going to like War of the Ring, the card game, because it does input randomness very cleverly. So you start the game with these huge decks, and it's unknown how your deck is ordered, right? But you're going to play through this entire deck, and all the while you're going to start eliminating cards, and you're going to start reserving cards, and you're going to whittle away and whittle away and whittle away. So at the same time, it's also unknown whether the battlefield drawn, what battlefield it will be, and whether it will be in your favor or in your opponent's. If it's in your favor, it has an inherent defense value for you. And it's even unknown whether you can even supply troops to fight in that battlefield, right? But as the game continues, you're going to eliminate lots of your deck and then use up a bunch of these battlefields so that there's only so many cards that are left in your deck that you are now familiar with because you've gone through it once and that you want to use. And you've set aside some of them, you've reserved them. Well, now there are only so many battlefields left in that battlefield deck. and you know what they are likely to be and how to best take advantage of their play based on what is left in the deck. So this game's challenges that it presents to you and your own deck, they whittle down in this conjoined fashion in such a way to maximize a player's agency right at the end of the game by allowing them to know the limited input randomness by the end of the game.
But it sounds like there's a certain memory element there, which is maybe not so much.
I wouldn't call it memory. I would call it familiarity with the deck. You can always reference what's in your elimination.
That's potato, Pat. But I know what you mean. I played.
If I know that I have a bunch of Southron cards in my deck, then you know that I'm going to play those Southron battlefields, and I'm going to pull them out of somebody else's victory pile so that I can beat the ever-living Oliphant out of them.
Right. And the more you play a game, the more you can have an intuitive sense of what's out there without having to strictly card count or anything like that.
Yes.
What's an example of a game that makes its math very hidden via this, that's not calculable, that you really enjoy?
I think it's games where there are two input randomness systems and they pull on each other. So Suhi's games do this very well, like Underwater Cities and Woodcraft. The reason that they work so well is that they usually pair two spectrums of input randomness together in a way that a bad option suddenly looks good. So Suhi's Underwater Cities, he has this stable board, but then he pairs it to input randomness of the cards in your hand, and suddenly that crappy green action, well, no, that looks pretty good because the green card in your hand that he can play it with will give you an extra turn, right? So it's this kind of intractable sense of the value of a card because it's ever-changing.
Yeah, and I like how he pairs, old-fashioned worker placement has very little input randomness in it. Old-fashioned, there's always some in the game somewhere. But if you think of, I don't know, Agricola, the exciting randomness is whether the baby hut comes out on one round or the round later, right? You know what I mean? There's very little there. It's all calculating the worker placement spots and what you're going to do, and that's why the draft of those profession cards adds so much, because it adds a little bit of randomness and planning to that there, right? Whereas the Suhi game takes something very stable with little randomness other than the player's choices in it, like worker placement, and then has these cards come up, right? And then has the cards be, only playable if you're playing on certain worker placement spots, right? So it pairs this thing, and you can play the stable worker placement game and follow your plan, right? Nothing prevents you from taking those worker placement actions to march along there. But the randomness of the cards gives you these alluring options along the way to pair with that, right? So it's like you said, it's the two systems. It's the stable one and the random one together that blend so well. The cards will be good for something. So if you have all these green cards, well, then start developing a green strategy where you're going to the green worker placement spots.
What mechanism would you say allots the fairest amount of input randomness? And I mean essential mechanisms. And by fairest, I guess it's a trade-off, right? It's a trade-off between predictability and variability, right?
Right, because the fairest is no input randomness at all.
Right.
Chess is the fairest game. It's an old school games either tended to be completely random or completely fair. You have your games like Sorry or Parcheesi that are completely random, total input randomness, and then you've got your chess with no input randomness. So I think modern board games, inherent in most modern board games, is looking for a compromise there, right? We don't like the total randomness of these random chance games, and we don't like the strict, unforgiving, skill-based games where two people sit down at the table and we know this person A is going to beat person B because they're better at the game and there's no luck, right? So we want something also that it's not just about it's predictable who's going to win, but we want something where we're sort of dealing with uncertainty. Input randomness makes games feel different from play to play and not scripted, another issue with those no-luck games like chess. And they also make you make these sort of decisions based more on heuristics than pure calculation, by which I mean decisions based on intuition, you could say, is a heuristic. I have a sense that a lot of the yellow cards are still out there. I'm going to play a yellow strategy in hopes those cards show up next round because not many of them have come out so far, the good yellow cards, right? That's sort of based on heuristic, not calculation. Does that compute?
It does compute.
So your question was, what is the fairest form of input randomness? In the modern board game sense, I don't think it's the question. I don't think that's necessarily the right question because we don't want the fairest. We want the most interesting.
Right, which is why I rephrased to the fairest in comparison to the providing the most variety.
Yeah, and I like your answer, the previous answer to what we were talking about before, to this question of have two systems and have one that's random and one that's very stable.
Right.
And of course, the other answer is have a lot of your input randomness be based on player interaction.
Right, because then you have an intuition about what somebody might want, their whims and wants.
There used to be a saying back, 20 years ago in Eurogames. It's like, I can't decide how to handle this. Make an auction, right? Which was the designer's lazy way of saying, let the players decide what it's worth. I'm not going to decide what it's worth. We'll just throw in an auction. And that's not good design because it's making the players
It's a lack of design.
It's a lack of design, and sometimes it's not smart to have the players think about everything and think about the value of everything. And it's better design and more streamlined to just set the value of something, right? Which is why auctions haven't endured as much. I mean, auction games are still great when they're done well, but it doesn't have to be an auction to be player interaction. By the way, you could say the way the cards come out is, in so many modern board games, that's the input randomness. So you're playing a deck builder. Okay, there's a market of cards that come out in Tyrants of the Underdark, or whatever non-Dominion deck builder you're playing, or you're playing a tableau builder. Whatever cards come out in the market to be bought, right? So in Shakespeare, there's a card tableau, and that's standard bit of randomness. But the turn order, which is how you get to choose who first gets a crack at the cards that come out, is determined by auction. And you're auctioning in that game actions. So you're bidding how many actions you're going to take. And you're bidding, the highest bid is the fewest, right? So if I bid 2 actions and you bid 3, then I'm going before you. And I get to take 2 actions on my turn and you get to take 3. Well, that may seem like a heavy price for turn order. And it sometimes is. But in the game, you also get a victory point for going first. And a victory point in a turn is huge. You win with like 33 victory points in that game, right? So 1 victory point is a lot. Also, you can't keep using your same actions. You have to rest from turn to turn. You can use a card one turn, then it rests on the other turn. So you could say, I'm going to take 5 actions this turn. Well, you'll go last, and not only that, you won't even be able to use all 5 actions on most of your turns, right? Or it'll be the worst 5 actions you can take. So that auction it's not just the resource, is how much you get to play, how many actions you get to take. And it's super thinky, and making the wrong decision in that auction can be crippling. And yet it never feels unfair. It feels just sometimes like the other player got in your head, right? Again, interactive elements are fair, or actions, or just the amount of randomness. When things come around, when you feel like, the cards for my strategy aren't in this turn, but they'll come out eventually. Now they literally do in games like Seven Wonders, and games like Lorenzo Il Magnifico, where all the same cards come out in ages. And that's a tableau building worker placement game, but it's similar to Seven Wonders, and it's staged with ages for maximum fairness to have all the cards eventually come out. But they don't just all come out at once; they come out in random order, right? So I think the way I'd answer your question is there's a trade-off between, and you can see this in Seven Wonders versus It's a Wonderful World, the trade-off between the fairness, when you say what's fair, and what's most dynamic, what's most replayable, which triggers the imagination most, which puts you in most new situations.
Yeah. My favorite element of high randomness games is probably how they balance out the choices. So what I really like about Race for the Galaxy, obviously, is that the great cards cost a lot, and you actually have to sacrifice other great cards in your hand in order to play them. But then one reason that Arc Nova is so successful is, yes, the randomness of the deck, but the fact that playing out each card has a match difficulty to it. So playing out a really great card is going to require that you have an upgraded animal card, an upgraded animal action, plus a huge enclosure for it, plus you probably have matching symbols, and only then are you going to play it out. And in a race game, that might just be too much. You might have to, you're going to have to play out that card before the end of the round, and you have to discard it, or you're going to waste too much time playing it before the game ends. And so the game self-balances where, yeah, the easy cards to put out that aren't worth that much are easy to put out, but then the difficult cards to put out are very difficult, but they're worth a lot. So I like these systems where there's a self-balancing mechanism within the elements themselves in these high input randomness games.
Yeah, although I will say, obviously you can get in a situation in these games where some of these games, again, you get into the It's a Wonderful World situation where some of these cards are early game cards and some of these games are late game cards, and if you get the late game cards early and the early game cards late, that's bad. And that doesn't always balance in these games. I will point to, while I've been critical of these large deck, high randomness tableau builders, that Terraforming Mars, for all the criticism that I sometimes give it, is clever in that it uses a Suhi-like system to have a stable system next to the randomness of the cards. You can just spend buying power to just buy trees and oceans, and it's not bad to play that way. Mm-hmm. And you're not dependent at all on what cards you draw when you do that in Terraforming Mars. So it does marry a stable. It's another example where it marries this stable system. Most people like to do dynamic card combos, but you're not stuck with that if the cards go against you in that game.
Yeah, and it's a thing that I've argued for in Arc Nova. There's lots of mitigation factors that are somewhat stable or at least predictable against the unstable system of the huge deck.
Fair enough. One of the things that I thought of most when I thought about this topic, partially because we're talking about Shake That City, is I think board games do themselves a service when their randomness is fulfilled by, you could call it a gimmick, I'm going to say a striking physical component choice. You can see it in Shake That City, but you can see it in something as simple as a bag builder. There's something visceral about grabbing those things out of the bag, whether it's Quacks of Quedlinberg, or whether it's Orleans, or whether it's Wonderland's War. When you have those chips, those wonderful chips in your bag, and you pull them out to win or lose, push your luck, and crash with madness in a battle in Wonderland's War. Yeah, it's crummy when you lose, but there's something about the physical sensation, the tactile element there, that really makes you okay with larger and larger amounts of randomness. I think I'm also a bit sort of conflating things here, because pulling things out of a bag, is not really the same thing as input randomness. But
I was going to say,
I wanted to make a point that interesting component choices really help mitigate player upset, or have randomness be a feature rather than a bug, whether it's input or output randomness.
Well, I'm spent. Did you have anything else on this topic?
I notice you kind of let me ramble. I'm sort of curious as to how much you will put in the final cut.
We'll see. But we'll see how long I want this episode to be.
I think sometimes those rambles went somewhere.
If I can find the start and find a finish, and if I can cut out the 26 miles in between, then maybe they'll make it.
I'm just thinking about other games that have the tactile elements, the math that's
something that does that well, yeah, and actually has a beautiful display is Seven Wonders Duel specifically, which has the
pyramid,
the high input randomness, but then also has flipped over cards where you don't know what they are. Right, so you not only have the initial outlay, you also have the random element of you don't know what's going to come next, and the fear of flipping that. But then it's presented in this beautiful display of row by row, built up into a pyramid, and then an upside down pyramid, and then an hourglass shape. And
people
it's
love
quite
the
tactile.
Flip of a card. It's there in poker, it's there in blackjack, it's there in Seven Wonders Duel. Turning over a card and your fate, it's like a tarot card thing almost. You know what I mean? Your fate is determined by the flip of a card. And nothing is... And I think that's as much the reason for the success of Seven Wonders Duel as the quality of the gameplay. There's so much riding on the flip of each card.
It definitely contributes.
Yeah.
And if Shake That City has any success at all, it will be because of that Shakey Boy Box.
Yes. Shakey Boy Box. I think we need a better name for it. Cube shaker pusher thing Dougal.
Dougal? I don't know how to spell Dougal, Tony.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for us tonight on Two Wood for a Wheat. Tell us about your favorite elements that inspire high input randomness, but that you still have a grasp of, that you can still get a hold of. You can tell us on our Discord. Check it out in the show notes. You can email us at TwoWoodForAWheat@gmail.com. And you can write Tony at Max Longstreet on his somewhat regular blog, The Secrets of Great Games on Board Game Geek.
Or come on the Discord and tell us, how we're conflating input and output randomness and have no idea what we're talking about.
Unless I edit that overstep out. Well,
I'm just saying we don't mind criticism as well.
We're open to it. Next episode, I hope to review War of the Ring, the card game, because I've been getting my plays in. How about you, Tony?
Well, it's going to be tricky. It's can I get to the? I'm trying to get some people together to play it over the 4th of July holiday, but it depends if I make it to the Poconos, and it depends if I can get Mitch on the phone. There's all sorts of variables here.
Okay.
It's like input randomness.
Oh, wow. And I feel completely out of control.
If not, maybe I'll frantically play the last 6, missions in Frosthaven before our next episode.
Oh, I'm not reviewing Frosthaven until I'm done.
What's
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We're reviewing like challengers or something on VGA.
Salt and pepper.
Let's do it.
Or what was that one that I was playing with Bill Varianor? It's that really simple dueling game. Is it the Seagulls and what is it? Seagulls and Robots or something?
The Seagulls of Savannah.
It's like Seagulls and Robots. It's
the
not
robots of the Rohirrim. The
It's
Vanguards of Venezuela.
it would be like a filler in more ways than one. A filler game, a filler episode.
If you don't get this game in, it's definitely a filler episode coming up.
Yeah. No, it's not a filler episode, Pat. It's a retro review. That's what it would be. A retro review.
Go play the game.
What would you like as a retro review? Did we ever? I'm just thinking.
I would do Seven Wonders Duel as a retro review.
Then I'd have to play Seven Wonders Duel.
It's on Board Game Arena.
That's true.
It's easy.
That's true.
Throwing it out there.
Argent the Consortium is a retro review.
I'm not getting enough plays of that in.
You're going to need to do 5 plays of that in the next
can't
week.
do that.
We need more insane friends.
Yes, I'm not surrounded by enough insane people. Although John is coming back in July for a couple days, so maybe.
Okay. How about It's a Wonderful Kingdom?
I don't even have a copy, so even if I could, fake a head nod towards yes, I'm not even going to tease.
Okay. Or a retro review of Acquire. Have you ever played Acquire?
No.
That you really should play sometime.
Well, I'll give it a shot.
I'll
give it a shot if you give Seven Wonders Duel a shot.
I've played Seven Wonders Duel quite a few times, Pat.
Well, you're all set then.
But Acquire is you discover something about the history of modern board games when you play Acquire. See,
They don't have auctions in them?
There are no auctions. And it's not it's a stock game. It's not, but it feels like when you play this game, it feels like a modern board game. And when you say this game was created in 1961, people are like, what? What?
Okay.
Or they would if they didn't know it already.
I'll give it a shot. Well, folks, that's going to wrap us up. Thanks for listening and stay frosty. Two Wood for a Wheat is recorded across the airwaves in Bear Creek, Pennsylvania, and Chicago, Illinois. We're produced by Tony Faber and edited by Patrick Flannery. Follow us on Instagram at TWFAW and find more episodes and blog posts at TwoWoodForAWheat.com. Your hair looks quite askew, though.
That is trivial. Not concerned about that one.
It's just I have to look at you, that's all.
Hey, I've had to look at you for 5 years. So.
And he loved every minute of it.
Is that like a wife beater you're wearing there?
It's a champion workout shirt. I'm a champion.
I
took
prefer the less.
City, we shook the city. We wooked the city. It was Kazakh, full of Wookiees. We wook it.
I prefer the more offensive term, wife beater. Stella! Okay.
My dog is concerned.
I don't know if we're going to come back from that.
Oh, he's giving me a paw. Hi.
Well, anyhow. Can I hear your best Blanche Dubois while you're at it?
I'm just a little old lady hoping to get on a train car filled with desire. I'm a wispy old lady with a wisp of hair flying out and leaves and willow wisps in my hair, and oh my, I fear I might just fade away.
I'm thinking of some dumb thing to say outro-ish material. Anything stupid in your life happening you want to mention?
You could say stay haveny.
No.
I have to go use my $2,000 plane ticket to do a domestic flight to friggin' Wyoming.
Why do you spend $2,000 to fly to Wyoming?
Because that's what it costs.
Why are you going to Wyoming?
Because all my family is there.
$2,000? Can't you get points or something? Or
if you don't use your money, you don't get the points. So sometimes you got to use the money, sometimes you got to use the points. Sometimes the flight to Wyoming gives you enough points to get to France.
At $2,000, I would take a train.
Yeah, well, not all of us have unlimited time off of work.
Drive through the night.
It's a 2-day drive. It's a solid 48 hours.
Oof, it's too big a country.
It is. We really should just cut out the middle. East Coast, West Coast. Maybe we keep some Denver and some Jackson Hole in between.
Well, I think we can lop off Florida.
Definitely can lap off Florida.
There's no politics on this podcast.
No.
None
But we'll
at all.
keep the money that's stashed away there.
Yeah.
We'll redistribute it.